Chapter 4, effective listening, right? So chapter 4 is a great chapter because it gives us information that we probably didn't think that we needed, that we didn't think was imperative, right? But it is. Effective listening is not just something that happens with the people in the audience that are observing and, listening to your speech, right? It happens on so many levels, and it's even a responsibility of the speaker, the presenter themselves, that they have some type of understanding of effective listening and what that is, because you're in essence doing listening while you're presenting your speech as well, right? Listening happens in a variety of ways, and we have to be able to get information in that natural transactional model that we talked about from chapter 1 at the same time, so we can modify, include, or retract information from our speech as necessary on the fly, right? That's important, right? So taking an excerpt from the textbook, right? We've all been teenagers at one point in time. Some of us are even still teenagers right now. And what have we done a million times over, or at least once, right? We've told somebody, you're not listening to me, right? You're not listening. Rarely have we ever said, you don't hear me, right? It doesn't mean the same thing. And we subconsciously and innately have that understanding. We know that hearing and listening aren't the same, right? And we probably got that at some point in time from our guardians or our parents or a teacher, some authority figure, somebody who said, you're not listening, right? You may have asked, do you hear me, right? But they ask that in a more naturalistic capacity, right? Do you hear me? Meaning, do you hear the volume? Do you hear things happening, right? Out of my mouth, right? Is there too much noise? There's too much going on in the environment, right? Am I too far away? They're asking, do you hear me for those reasons? But listening has a different level of responsibility. You're not listening to me. You may have heard what I said, but you're not listening because you haven't done what it is I've asked you to do, right? Or you haven't shown that you are reacting in an effective manner to what it is I have prompted you on. You may have heard me, but you didn't listen to me, right? So an authority figure, parent, guardian, maybe even a partner has said those things to us. Or maybe we've said that to someone else, meaning these things. You may have heard me, but you weren't listening to me. And that's where effective listening comes in. In order to have listened to someone, regardless of whether you heard them or not, you have to effectively, you have to choose to listen. You have to hit the switch, and you have to activate your go-go gadget cognitive device where you pick up the nuances, the depth, the specificity of the content, the point, the meaning, what it is that they're actually doing with their mouth or their voice or whatever it is they're using to make the sound that we hear. They're giving us symbols. They're giving us a message. It may be encoded in a certain way, right? It may be through actual words. It may be through language that is more specific or culturally encapsulated, right? Maybe slang, or maybe given to us in a certain language, or whatever the case. Regardless of how the sound comes out that we hear, there's a meaning behind it that we listen to it, and we listen to it effectively, right? So what does it take to be able to listen effectively, right? We talked about the difference between hearing and listening as it shows on our slides. We know that we can hear, most of us, right? Unless you're actually deaf and you can't hear, which is okay, right? Because you do communicating in a different way. You may use sign language, you may use Braille, you may use different accommodations that help if that sense isn't working for you, the hearing sense isn't working for you. Then you use these other things, right? But we know that we hear naturally, innately, and unintentionally. We hear things that come into our ear, the sound waves come into the vicinity of our ear, right? We don't necessarily even choose to do this; it just happens, right? Have you ever been walking down the street and you hear like a high-pitched dog whistle, and you're like, oh, what is that, right? And it may just be it may be a frequency that someone's using for some type of device or whatever the case, but you hear it. You don't intend to hear it, you don't even like it, right? Or nails on the chalkboard. Oh, I don't even like to think about that. It just makes me feel some kind of way, right? But just the sounds that invade, right, our eardrums, and they just bother us, right? Well, that's the worst case scenario, end of the spectrum, right? Let's jump to the other end of the spectrum, things that may be a little more desirable, like the wind or the birds chirping, right? Or the sound of traffic when we're walking down the street, right? The murmur of a group of people in a social setting or an academic setting, right? Things that we hear that we didn't necessarily plan on it, right? Now, when that happens, more often than not, this is happening subconsciously. You're not choosing to do this. Your brain is just picking up on this stuff. And more than likely, you aren't doing a whole lot with that information. Your brain is keeping a little bit of a tab on what's happening. Yeah, you know, because if the voices start to pick up or become a little more pitchy, a little more, you know, high tempo, with a little more excitement, then you might start to listen a little more. Like, wait, what's going on? You'll tune in and you'll connect, and you might have to react to the information. Right? Oh, something's happening, I might have to run, right? Fight or flight. Or I might have to, you know, do something. Uh-oh, I need to hurry up and get myself together, or whatever the case, right? So that unintentional subconscious hearing that we do transforms the listening once we hit a switch. A lot of times that happens in our brains. We don't necessarily choose to do it, but we can, and we should choose to actually hit the listening switch and become an effective listener, right? So that hearing thing that we do, now I say that's innate. And what does that mean? That's been going on since the beginning of time, since the beginning of the sense, since the beginning of when we needed hearing in order to survive, right? When we were Neanderthals and cave people, or regardless of what you believe in, science or creation or whatever the case, at some point in time, we needed this sense to know what was happening around us. There are things that maybe we weren't focused on, right? You were building a fire, you hear the crunching of twigs and leaves of not just 2 legs, but 4 legs. Oh, there's a saber-toothed tiger coming, right? Or there is a wild buffalo coming, or an elephant, or a panther, or something like that. And you know, I gotta either get the heck out of here, or I need to hide, right? Or I need to get this fire going and get a stick so I can feed off this creature before I become its dinner, right? More than that, what else might we have heard, right? Maybe you'll hear thunder, right? Thunder bellowing in the background somewhere. Lightning's coming, right? If I'm flying a kite with a key attached to it, I might want to bring that thing down, right? Or if I'm on a power pole or the top on a roof somewhere, I hear thunder, lightning's coming, let me go ahead and get myself down, right? Or you're walking in your phone, and you hear the roar of an engine. All of a sudden, you become a little more alert, and you might react without even looking, might start to run, or might jump back or something, right? That's survival because of what we heard. But the listening component is with intentionality. It is a conscious effort, and it is hopefully going to lead to some type of success or production, right? When you listen intentionally, then you start to make decisions, right? When you make decisions, then you start to act. So sometimes that happens through that subconscious reaction from hearing something, then also tuning in on it, listening to it, feeling like we need to react, right? Sometimes it happens a little more cautiously, a little more slowly, where we're hearing things, we turn on that effective listening, and then we start to get something from that right in the moment, right? And we'll talk about types of listening in a second. Right? Okay, so I want to give you one more scenario with the hearing versus listening, right? Now, in talking about the types of listening, then you'll start to understand which type of listening this is. But this is a setting right now where you may have heard initially when you logged on the jazz music, right? You may have heard tapping of keys. You may have heard my laptop loud mode or whatever the case, right? So you knew that class was starting, lecture was starting, but you weren't necessarily dialed in or connected. You were doing other things. Maybe you're getting a notepad ready. Maybe you're eating some breakfast. Maybe you're on your phone or watching TV or something. And then once you heard Professor Foreman say, "Good morning, happy Monday. We're going to talk about chapter 4. You start to listen. You hit the switch. Boop. So you go from hearing to, okay, I need to pay attention and focus on this so I get this content. And maybe you're still just hearing. You're like, you ain't saying nothing important yet, right? Whatever the case, right? But that is the choice. That's the switch. That's the decision that we make when we go from hearing to listening. And that's something that's going to lead us to our different types of listening, right? So there are 4.5-ish types of listening, okay? There's your appreciative listening. There's your relational listening. There's your emphatic or therapeutic listening. That's our 1.5 there. And then there's our informative or informational listening, right? And you'll start to understand the difference between these here. It's really important to understand what we're doing when we're doing these things, right? So the text describes our appreciative listening as this. You have a favorite song, right? Or you really like this motivational quote that someone sent you over social media that you saw on YouTube or whatever the case, right? When we're turning our attention to something that we like, poetry, right? Cool freestyle, right? The sound of someone's voice that's important to us or dear to us, right? A really cool sitcom or a movie scene that you like, right? When you turn on the listening to specifically focus on this thing that you like, that is appreciative listening. That's listening for appreciation, right? You're not necessarily looking to get information from it. You're not necessarily looking to build a connection with it. You like it. It feels good to you. It makes you feel some kind of way inside that you really enjoy. So you do it. Appreciative listening, right? Now, relational listening is something that we usually are required to do in order to maintain our relationships. And when I say relationships, I'm talking about all the different type of relationships that we have, right? Our relationship with our parents or guardians, our relationship with our siblings, our relationship with our friends, our relationship with our actual intimate partners, right? But then think of your professional relationships, relationship with your boss or your supervisor, relationship with your colleagues, relationship in your academic settings with your instructors or with your academic colleagues or your classmates, right? With your counselors, right? With the deans of departments, right? With financial aid, right? With the people at the bank, right? We have all these different types of relationships that we have to manage. And guess what? There are certain type of listening that you have to do to maintain those relationships. That's called relational listening. This is when we're listening to a friend or a family member, right? Or we're listening to an authority figure that we need to develop a relationship with for our own success, right? And we're letting them know that we're paying them attention. We're intentionally saying, hey, I'm listening to you. I'm picking up that information. You're giving good paralinguistics that show that you're engaged in the information. You're not being disruptive or combative, right? Or confrontational, right? You're building a relationship through offering support potentially, as stated in the text. Showing empathy for feelings or discussing a situation that someone else is a part of, right? Giving equal parts of listening and also feedback to show that you've picked up on the information, you understand what's being said, and you're giving effective feedback back. As part of listening, we'll talk about that more later, the feedback component, right? But that's the relational listening where you are building a relationship or maintaining a relationship, okay? Our 1.5 is going to be our empathetic or therapeutic listening, okay? Showing empathy is like showing sympathy, where you say, oh man, sorry that happened, right? Oh, you lost your puppy, or your ball got kicked over the fence, or, you know, you dropped $20 somewhere. Sorry, that sucks, right? Showing sympathy. Empathy is when, hey, I know how you feel. Right? I'm really sorry. Is there anything I can help you with? You know, I got $4 for you. You need to grab coffee or something. Hey, I'm sorry. I'm showing empathy. Not only am I sorry about this situation, but I feel your pain. I'm aligning with that emotion, and I'm trying to forward that, be constructive in that by supporting you through your situation. To be empathetic, you have to really connect with the individual. You have to listen to the plight first and foremost, of course, but you have to also align with it. You kind of have to know what that feeling entails, right? But also there's therapeutic listening, which kind of goes hand in hand with that, because one could argue that if you're being empathetic and you're understanding where that person is, you're putting yourself in that space and you're looking to help them through it, that you're providing some type of therapy, right? So consider the role of a therapist or a counselor as specified in the text, right? Or conflict mediator, right? Have you ever been in court and you had to have mediation, or you have kids, you've ever had to split custody or whatever the case, or you just have siblings and, you know, you have to try to, you know, coincide with them in a certain way where no one felt like they were getting an advantage or being short-sighted or whatever the case. You have to manage those situations, right? That may have been a scenario where you practiced being empathetic or therapeutic listening, right? Okay. Let's talk about informational listening. Now that is pretty much any type of listening we do where we're pulling information that we may need to use in order to have an advantage or to be ready for another scenario, right? So that informed listening is going to be you listening, for instance, to the political debate, the presidential debate that was on TV last week. Or you attending a class, right? And the instructor or the professor is talking about stuff, talking about chapter 4, effective listening. And you're just listening to the information, you're writing notes, all that. You're doing that informational listening, right? Listening to a salesperson talk to you about a car or a computer or a phone, right? You're listening and say, oh, okay, oh, those are the features. Oh, cool. That's the battery life. Okay, cool, right? You're getting all that information in because you're going to make a decision on that, right? Or, you know, talking to a friend who's saying, hey, man, you know, you should take this trip with me, man. It's going to be so fun. We're going to Cabo, right? You should join in. Let me tell you what we're going to do, man. We're going to have a villa. You know, we're going to have this, like, all-inclusive, you know, all you can eat, man, all that good stuff. You pull the information in. And what you're listening for is you're listening for key points that influence or confirm our judgments, right? We're going to make a judgment call. And that information that we get from the informative listening is either going to help us make our decision or it's going to confirm the decision that we've already made, right? As the text specifies, when we are focused on gaining information, whether it be from a teacher in the classroom, a pastor at a church, or a friend in a social scenario, we're engaged in informational listening. We're trying to pull that information out, right? All right. So let's talk about the value of listening, right? We know the different types of listening we're going to do when we turn it on from hearing to listening. But what is the value of it? One large value that you're engaged in right now is, of course, the academic benefit of listening. That is, of course, where you're going to be better prepared, right? You're going to be better prepared for the exam or the assignment or the discussion that happens after the lecture, right? Another part of the academic benefit is that you'll be able to get instructions for how you're supposed to do things. You'll be able to help your classmates out, academic classmates out, right? Or be able to just inform yourself. It'll decrease stress and anxiety when you have a firm understanding or familiarity with content that happens within a course or in relation to assignments, and you'll be able to just do it, right? Because you were part of the discussion, right? Another area of the academic benefit is, of course, it's going to increase your confidence in the subject matter, right? You're going to become more engaged, more informed, right? And be able to better regurgitate, right? Or forward the information out. Sometimes you're just regurgitating it for yourself, right? You're listening to it, you're repeating it, maybe taking notes on it. And so when you look at it, it's going to make that much more sense to you. Or if you have to tell it to someone else, it's going to make that much more sense to them because you're familiar with the content. Professional benefits. There is a professional benefit to listening, right? And you have to have a job or you have to have some familiarity with work experience to understand this professional benefit. But you can just go through life hearing things and not really paying attention to anything, right? As we know, you probably aren't going to develop really strong, deep connections with people, the relationships that you need to be successful in the world. You're probably not going to get a whole lot of information that's going to put you in a position to be self-sufficient, right? And proactive, right? Diligent, right? And impactful, right? Through your engagements. All right? But more often than not, you're not going to be in a position to understand people, right? And that's what happens through the type of listening that happens in a professional setting, right? You're understanding your colleagues, what their needs are, their praises and their criticism. You're understanding your supervisor, your boss, what the responsibilities are of your job, how you can perform better, how you maybe can put yourself in a position to get recognized, right? Through a promotion or through acknowledgement or whatever the case, added responsibility or, you know, whatever, right? Professional benefits can connect you with customers or consumers, clients, people that you're working with who may be paying you or your company money for services. If you're listening to them as opposed to just hearing them, right, then you may pick up on things that will put you in a better position to serve their needs, right? So you can become that much better at your job, that much better at serving these individuals or building a relationship, you know, collaboration or partnership, I should say, if you're not necessarily serving them, but working collaboratively with them. So professional benefits can ultimately lead you to just become better, become more efficient, and even more successful in what it is you're doing. Now, the personal benefits, the communication loop. We know what this is. We do this all the time, right? The communication loop is basically that transactional model of communication that we talked about in chapter 1, right? that you're the communicator. You're not necessarily a speaker or receiver. You may be speaking at the moment, but you're also receiving the eye contact back from the receiver or the person you're talking to. You're receiving the body language, right? The paralinguistics are saying something to you. Because someone could be saying, right? Or they could be saying, right? It's still saying something, and it's immediate feedback. But you have to be listening, right? If you're just talking, and you're hearing them make noise, but you're not really paying attention to it, then you won't get the cues that will help you be successful in that communication loop, right? So it's important to understand that we have to also be effective listeners even when we're giving out information, right? For instance, if you're talking to an audience, right, a large audience, right, and you hear somebody in the back yell something, right, that's not true, right, or whatever, you can choose to ignore them, right, or you can choose to engage with them. Or maybe it will motivate you to make you realize that you haven't given the credible source behind your information. You may say, and this information I'm giving, for any of those that may feel that this isn't accurate or this isn't truthful, but it actually comes from, you know, blah, 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 from 1942, which was authored by blah, 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 right? You give your credible information. So if you're listening effectively, then you can on the fly kind of modify, and it will make you a more engaging and a more connected disseminator of information, okay? All right. Is listening a lost art? That's subjective, right? My generation, which is the late 30s, 40s generation, right? Which I'll argue is a different generation from the majority of the class who are in the 20s and something like that. That's a different generation, right? 20 years or so, I say it's a generation. 18 is you're an adult, so that's like the old generation, right? So every 20 years is a generation. So I say my generation is probably the first generation where we had access to like handheld devices like Walkman, CD players, and handheld devices like Game Boys, and that have evolved to all the new video games and all the things that you can walk around doing now. We had the first cell phone, right? The first real cell phone that you actually were able to get, the Nokia brick phone or whatever the case, right? But we started this trend of being distracted, being engaged in other things while you're moving about your life, right? So is listening a lost art? I would argue that it is, right? We don't innately choose to turn on the listening switch. A lot of times we are forced to listen because it is a requirement of our endeavor, what we're engaged in at the moment, whether it be school or work or whatever. But there was a point in time where you intentionally connected, right? You intentionally wanted to listen and have strong vibes with people in a social setting, usually physically, walking down the street, right? Picking up the telephone, right? Doing things of that nature as opposed to sending a quick text or, you know, a chat thread or whatever the case on your favorite social media app or whatever. So I think that listening has kind of gone out the window because there's so many, the modality of communication has changed. And it's less of a connection, right? It's just machines connecting with one another through us, right? But regardless of that, there is still the need for active listening, right? Active listening is still a thing, and it will always be a thing until we have avatars that are operating for us in the world, and we can't be touched or impacted, and we're just sitting in our bubble somewhere. That may or may not happen in the future, who knows? But listening will be necessary until we no longer need to listen, until we no longer need to engage with other people, and hopefully that will never end, but who knows, right? But in thinking about that active listening component, there are 3 specific A's, as in the letter A, to active listening, right? In order to be an active listener, which is, of course, effective listening, where you're self-aware, right? You turn on the switch, you know that you intentionally turned on the switch. You are paying attention. You are not only hearing, but you're doing that, as the text described, passively listening or actively engaging, right? Either way, you're listening for information that you need to respond to, or you are ready to go and you're like, okay, give me the information, right? So I can use it right now. Either way, you're doing more than hearing, right? But in order to do that, you have to first pay attention, right? You have to be attentive to the speaker or the person, the source of the information, be attentive to the environment, the setting, and the context or the purpose for the information. Why is it being delivered? What benefit is it, or what connection does it have to you? So that attention is the fundamental difference between hearing and listening, right? It's a state of mind. When you pay attention to something, you turn the dial from just hearing, where you're not paying it any attention, it's just going in one ear and out the other, to actually paying attention to it, where it's going in one ear, you're cognitively processing it, and then you're spewing out whatever you don't need and keeping what you do want, right? That is where you're using that attention A, right? You're giving the attention to the information, and then you're getting from it what you need, right? Oops. All right. The next A in the active listening after attention is attitude. In order to be an active listener, you're going to pay attention to something, but you have to have the right attitude when you engage into this, engage with this information or with these sounds, with this content. You have to be proactive and engaged, but ready and willing to receive the information. What that means is you have to have a positive attitude, or attitude that is inclined towards the information. That means you're not ready to give a snap judgment or have death spots because you don't like the individual or you don't like the content. For instance, right? Let's say I'm pro-life, meaning I'm against abortion, right? And I apologize ahead of time if this is triggering in any way, shape, form, or fashion to anyone in the audience. But just giving an example here. It's politically charged a little bit. It's not how I genuinely feel. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That's not neither here nor there. But an example is, say I'm pro-life. Right? I'm not for abortion. I'm not for not being able to give a creation of life the opportunity to live. Whatever, right? That's where I am. And then I'm in a scenario where I'm listening to someone who is pro-choice, meaning that women should have the choice to either have the life or not have that life, right? That's created within them. Now, if I don't have the attitude that's necessary for me to fully receive this information, whether it's persuasive or not, that means that I'm either ready to make a snap judgment. This person that's pro-choice is wrong, right? They're un-American, or they are they're a heathen, or they're, you know, whatever way I want to describe that person as pro-choice, because they don't agree or believe in the same thing I believe in, right? That means I'm closed off. I'm going to have deaf spots in terms of the information they're providing. I'm going to just not hear some things. I don't hear it. It doesn't vibe with how I feel. It doesn't fit my perspective or the judgment or the way I live, right? Or my culture, whatever the case. So that attitude is really important, because then I can still be pro-life, but then I can listen to the pro-choice argument or the dissemination and say, you know, hopefully this person hasn't been waiting too long, right? Sorry, I had to add someone in the waiting room. Back to it. I can listen to the person that is pro-choice, and I can say, you know, I'm pro-life, but I do understand where the pro-choice person is coming from. I do understand a perspective different from my own, where someone who, you know, who is concerned for their body or their well-being, or, you know, whatever their motivation is, that they want to be able to make that decision. And I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand. Then you're doing effective listening, and you can give feedback that may be more ethically inclined, right? And you can ask more questions, and it may help you reach a consensus or an agreement, potentially. So you need to pay attention. You need to have a positive attitude, or at least an attitude inclined towards receiving the information. Last but not least, the last A is adjustments, right? And that's what happened in my pro-choice example, right? I'm pro-life, they're pro-choice. I am open, I give it attention, I have a decent attitude, I'm able to make an adjustment, right? From being very I'm very contrast, I'm against it, I'm not for it at all. Not adjustment, I become more flexible. The importance of the point, it's a reward. I follow it like a road, and I'm rewarded with the destination of having a greater understanding and a greater appreciation of this other perspective, this other point of view. And I can say, I understand now. I get it. Okay. I mean, I'm still pro-life, but I get why people are pro-choice, right? I hate them less, or whatever the case, right? And again, that's not how I truly feel, but I'm just giving an example. Okay. So those 3 A's are really important to be able to engage in the active version of effective listening. Now, what are barriers to effective listening? And there are barriers, as we know, right? First and foremost, we see this all the time in arguments and we hate it, right? You get into this conflict with someone and they already know what you're going to say, right? Are they, yeah. And you're going to say, and they finish your thought for you. And you're like, that's not even what I was thinking. That's not even what I was going to say, right? And it just prolongs the argument. You get more worked up and revved up and triggered, or whatever you want to call it. Anticipating what's happening. You anticipate what the listener is going to, what the speaker is going to say. You're not engaging in effective listening. You're not giving them opportunity to flesh out their ideas. Now, sometimes people can be a little redundant, repetitive, and they can just draw, they can draw on and on and on with the information and just bore your whole brain, right? In that scenario, we may want to, okay, yeah, I get it. This is what you're going to say, right? It's a little different, right? But if a person is doing a decent job at disseminating information, and you are participating in effective listening, then you're not going to anticipate what it is they're going to say. You may have an idea of where they're going with the information, but you're going to let them flesh that out, get their full points out, and then you're going to give feedback so that you can show that you have an understanding of what transpired or what is being disseminated, right? You're engaging in a complete transactional understanding. I received the information, I'm giving it back to you. So what you said was this, right? So what you relayed was this. So the information you provided was this, right? You're just getting that confirmation. Another barrier outside of anticipation is judging. Now, you may not anticipate what's happening, but you judge what they're saying immediately, which is going to give you a little bit of a slant or a bias when you give that effective feedback, right? That constructive feedback. That is usually part of effective listening. So when you're effective listening, you're listening to what they're saying. You're not judging them immediately. You may have feelings about what it is they're talking about, subject matter, but you're giving them the floor to fully work out their routine. Then at the conclusion of this information, you can make a judgment call. But if you do it before they get there, then it can take you all the way back to that attitude change. You make a judgment call, attitude changes, deaf spot starts to develop. I can't hear that because I'm closed off because my attitude changed because I judged you already. You didn't even get to finish, right? So anticipating what's going to be said may lead to judging what is said before it's done, and could ultimately jump back and impact your attitude so that you're no longer being active in this effective listening, or listening, which means that it's going to be ineffective, right? The last barrier to effective listening is as follows. Emotions. Oh, we all have them. We've all used them. We've all been a culprit to them, which means that we have utilized, maybe effectively, maybe ineffectively, our emotions, and they have potentially impacted how well we're able to listen and engage in this scenario, right? Maybe you get angry, you get triggered. Maybe you get sad, you get emotional, you get detached. Maybe you get worked up and frustrated, right? Maybe you're so enamored or in love that you just miss all the cues and flags, right? Whatever the case. But reacting emotionally can be a barrier because you're not able to compartmentalize and discern what it is being produced, right? What it is being said, spoken, provided, or laid out, to where it is important that you take, individual piece of information or details and formulate an informed position that's objective. More often than that, it should be objective. You need to start at that point at least, right? So anticipating, judging, reacting emotionally, barriers to effective listening, right? But what are strategies to help you enhance your listening, right? If you're like right now, well, wow, man, I do judge and anticipate sometimes. Sometimes I get emotional. Right? How can I be better at effective listening, Professor Foreman? Well, let me tell you. Strategies to enhance listening are as follows. Keeping an open mind, right? Growth mindset, right? Not a closed mind, but an open mind, regardless of what the subject matter is. Maybe it's something you've heard a million times, maybe something you have experience with, maybe it even triggers a traumatic response for you. If it is something that you're able to engage in and listen to, keep an open mind about it, because you never know where it may go or what it may open up for you, right? As far as your understanding of the content and how it can impact you in your life, right? Or your profession or your schooling, whatever the case. try to keep an open mind. It's not the easiest thing to do. We are flawed creatures, right? We more often than not kind of have preconceived notions and agendas, and they kind of force us to already think things and make judgment calls. But your goal, of course, is to try to take your mind and switch it to where you are giving everyone the understanding of their platform, being empathetic, practicing the platinum rule, treating others how they want to be treated as opposed to how we want to be treated, right? But it may enable you to have that open mind. Another thing you do is identify what the distractions might be to effective listening. Is it something that is in the environment? Is it noise, right? Physiological noise happening in the environment or happening within you. You're going through something or whatever the case, right? And you know, hey, I'm a little distracted right now. It's going to keep me from being able to listen to you. You can communicate that, right? That may be something that keeps the situation from getting funky, right? But you understand, oh, maybe there's other distractions, right? Maybe how the person's presenting information, their lack of credible sources, right? Maybe it's their physical appearance, right? Or maybe it's who they're aligned with or who they're associated with. Or there can be a million different distractions that keep you from wanting to engage in effective listening with with information, right? But you have to identify what the things are so you can start to work backward and kind of get them out the way so you can be ready to get the information. Coming prepared, being informed about who's giving the information, what the information is or how it can be used, and what your familiarity is with the information, right? You come prepared, and there's a better chance that when someone's talking about something, you're not going to be maybe turned off still, but you're not going to disconnect. And you're not going to just be left out in the cold, totally unfamiliar and confused about what's happening. You've done your research, right, ahead of time, so you're familiar. And when you're familiar with something and you engage with it, then it's a greater possibility that you'll be able to absorb the information and immediately find value in it, be able to use it, right? More immediate than if you weren't knowledgeable about it. And last but not least, take notes when you're getting information, right? This may not always be opportune. It may not always be realistic. If you're having a discussion with someone, dialogue with someone on walking or down the hall, you might not be able to take notes right then and there. But later on, you can start to kind of recall that conversation or that information you were receiving and just start to jot things down that may have been important. It may allow you to come back and engage with this individual and maybe build on the relationship or start a partnership or collaborate, right? Or it may help you in whatever information you need from that exchange that you can forward, right? For instance, if it's a lecture and you came in late, you weren't able to get your notepad out, but you remembered a couple things. So when you got outside in the hallway after class was over, right, you can jot a couple things down that may help you later on with an assignment or a task or whatever the case. So strategies to enhance listening, of course, are keeping the open mind, identifying the distractions, coming prepared, and maybe even taking notes, right? And this last part of effective listening, and not the last part of the chapter, but the last part of what we're talking about right here with how you go about effective listening, barriers to effective listening, strategies to get back to effective listening, and is the providing feedback part. So we talked about this earlier. I said we'll get back to it. Now, you're going to provide feedback a number of ways. You're going to do it subconsciously. You're going to do it consciously, right? You're going to do it with your whole body, your arms, your eyes, your mouth, your head position, the distance, right? And you have to be cognizant of this. Being an effective listener means that you are also modifying or at least being aware of what you're doing as a listener, right? What are you doing with your body? Are your hands closed off, across your chest, right? Maybe seeming like you're standoffish, right? Are you leaning in, providing a listener's lean, right? Are your eyebrows up, like wow? Or are they furrowed and low, like I don't believe you, right? Are you smiling? Are you frowning, right? In being an effective listener, all these things are important because they're giving immediate feedback to the listener. And the listener's going to look at you and say, what's wrong? Why are your eyebrows doing that, right? Or why is your mouth doing that? Why are your arms closed? What's wrong, right? You're giving them information with your nonverbal communication, right? And those can be problematic in showing that you're an effective listener, right? Because if a person's talking to me and the whole time I'm like this, right? Sure, I may have absorbed everything, but they may also feel like I'm not, because I'm making a judgment call and they may stop talking or want to sever the relationship or the communication at that point in time, whatever the case, right? But verbally, I can show that I'm being an effective listener by asking open-ended questions and not closed questions, right? So for instance, if someone's telling me about their day, right? And they go into all these details, right? And I ask a closed question like, so was it a good or bad day, right? That doesn't really give a whole lot of, it doesn't show that I'm interested in the nuances and the details of the full spiel, right? It just, I want to get to the gist. It was a good or bad day. I'm not really listening to you. I just want to know, that's cool, all that stuff you did, right? But that's an open-ended question. Oh, what was the best part of the day, right? Or, wow, maybe you can help me. I'm not having a great day. What is something maybe I can do today to have a day as good as yours or something, right? An open-ended question where that person gets the opportunity to share more or to elaborate on details or whatever the case. But that'll show that you're listening effectively, because you're not only engaged with the information, but you're giving them the opportunity to, expand a little more, right? Confirming your understanding, I talked about this, and giving feedback. So basically what you said was, this, right? Or what you communicated was this, or the way to do it is like this, right? And you're giving them confirmation that you understand what it is they're saying, that there was clarity in what they were communicating. That's another way to show you are listening effectively. Lastly, I talked about that objectivity, being objective, not subjective, not taking a side, not choosing, not judging, but just being open initially and eventually using that to inform your decision. And sometimes you can just paraphrase, right? Person says, hey, to make the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you got to get the bread out, get your peanut butter, your jelly, maybe you want to warm the bread a little bit, get a plate or something, get your nice little spreading device, and you're going to spread it on, peanut butter and jelly, and, then you're going to, put a little side thing there, and you're going to eat it up. And I might say, okay, so basically what you're saying is, I need bread, peanut butter, jelly, I'm going to spread it on, maybe get something to eat with it, right? I'm paraphrasing, right? Just giving a shortened version of what you told me, so I can show you that I fully understand what it is that you're saying, right? All right, so how do you encourage effective listening in creation of your speech? This is probably the most important and the most relevant component of chapter 4, because this is what you'll do in your informative speech, hopefully, right? You're going to encourage effective listening by writing for the ear, right? You're writing for the ear, meaning you're writing your outline based on what you're going to say, not what is going to be read. And that's where I talked about those full-on sentences, right? You're writing a full sentence in your sentence in your outline. For what reason? Why are you writing a full sentence? Who's grading on grammar on your outline? Well, I'm not, because it's about the presentation. I want you to have all the components of your outline, sure, but does that have to be grammatically correct? No, you're doing bullet points, you're doing Roman numerals, you're doing main point, sub point. You don't have to be grammatically correct. It should be sensible, make sense and clear, but you're writing for how it's going to sound. So you're writing it, when you read it and you start to recite it and practice it, you're going to hear how you're saying things, and then you should modify your outline to reflect what sounds best, so people can be listeners and be effective in their listening. Make your listeners care about what it is you're saying, right? And how are you going to do that? We talked about this with chapter 3 in ethics, right? And also in immediacy. Make it right now, make it interesting, make it something that the listener cannot afford to not hear or not listen to, right? Make it immediate for them, right? Give it some value, right? Spice it up a little bit with the attention-getting device, but make the listeners care about what you're saying. Tap into your intrinsic motivation, right? Add some curiosity, right? Challenge your audience and contextualize the content so that it is relevant to them, it's immediate right now, and you have a personal connection to it as well, right? Hit those three prongs on the triangle, right? The Trinity, the literal Trinity, right? Where, they want to know more, right? And they feel like they're going to get something from that, right? It's almost like a contest or something. But then it's also connected to you, so you're invested as well, right? And last but not least, convince the audience to engage. How is the audience going to engage? It's going to be a little more difficult through this modality, but the audience can be persuaded to think about responses, right? Ask a rhetorical question, right? For instance, if I were doing the chocolate chip cookie informative speech, maybe I would ask a rhetorical question like, have you ever had a cookie? Not just any kind of cookie, but one of the most famous and oldest cookie, recipe-wise, that exists in our modern or our social existence. That cookie. Have you ever had that cookie? Whether or not you should taste this cookie or be familiar with what this cookie is, do know that this cookie has history. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today, the history of the chocolate chip cookie. Now, some people may describe this as delicious. Some may feel that it's full of sugar and it's unhealthy. What I'm here to inform you about is that it has historical value. It is something that people utilize as a treat or a snack or a dessert, but that it has a greater value, culturally speaking, as well, right? So that's how I would go into that, and I would get you to engage, and I would go these different routes and use language like we talked about in chapter 10, and use different approaches like we talked about in chapter 12, but to build this picture of something that you need to listen to. You need to get the information up, and it connects to you, and it connects to me, and it's relevant, so on and so forth. Right? All right. So in essence, that is chapter 4, effective listening. Just to recap, we talked about the difference between hearing and listening. We talked about the different types of listening that you can do, right? We talked about the value of listening, right? And then we'll also talk about what barriers there are to listening, right? We talked about how you can go about creating opportunities for effective listening. And also, when you are engaging in effective listening, what the different types of active listening are within effective listening, right? And then we can kind of compile and compare this and put it together with nonverbal and verbal components of what happens when effective listening is happening and when it's not happening, right? And last but not least, we looked at ways to encourage effective listening. Okay. Any questions about chapter 4? All right. Okay. So I'm going to try to get this up a little earlier than I normally do. Usually I try to get it up 24 to 48 hours, but I'll try to get this up today. And then don't forget Wednesday, we'll talk about chapter 6, which is critical thinking. And it has a similar theme where there are things that happen in our brains, and then there's things that we actually focus on in our brains, right? Thinking that's more critical. So it's very similar. That's why I like to group these two chapters together, because they talk about the innate version of what comes in our ears, or innate version of what comes into our brains, what we observe and absorb, and then how we go about filtering out what is necessary for us in that moment through effective listening or through critical thinking, right? So it's really cool. Chapter 6 is another interesting area. But we'll get into fallacies and all that. And fallacies are really important when you start to build your informative speech. Being careful about the information that you choose to say is credible, right? Is it credible, or is it potentially a fallacy? What does that mean, right? And that's pretty much it for chapter 4. Thanks so much for listening. If you have questions, I'll stay here for a couple minutes. But look out for your when my grades today. Look out for my interpretation of an informative speech with an outline. But you have tons of examples online. You're ready to go. And I wish you good luck in starting to compose that informative speech, potentially presenting on Wednesday or days thereafter. Without further ado, enjoy the remainder of your Monday. I will see you all Wednesday.